I sat at the familiar mahogany dining table where I had endured countless family gatherings, watching my sister Jennifer bask in the golden glow of everyone's admiration. The crystal chandelier cast warm light across her beaming face as she described her recent promotion to junior attorney at Whitman and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. Mom's eyes sparkled with pride as she hung on every word, nodding enthusiastically, while Aunt Patricia, Uncle Frank, and Cousin Marcus showered Jennifer with congratulations. The aroma of Mom's famous pot roast filled the air, but I had lost my appetite hours ago. Then came the words that sliced through me like a blade. "Maybe if you were more like your sister." Mom sighed, her voice dripping with disappointment as she glanced at me sitting quietly in the corner. Jennifer raised her champagne flute, her perfectly manicured fingers catching the light as she prepared to make a toast. Her shoulder-length auburn hair was styled in soft waves that framed her heart-shaped face, and her navy blue blazer screamed success and sophistication. She had always been the golden child, the one who exceeded expectations, while I remained invisible in her shadow. To new beginnings and hard work paying off, Jennifer announced, her voice carrying that confident tone she had perfected in law school. The room erupted in applause, with Uncle Frank slapping his knee and Cousin Marcus whistling appreciatively. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her linen napkin, overwhelmed with maternal pride. I had grown accustomed to these moments over the years. At 28, I had become an expert at shrinking into the background, letting Jennifer claim the spotlight, while I wrestled with my own sense of inadequacy. My simple gray sweater and jeans stood in stark contrast to the celebration happening around me. Nobody asked about my life, my goals, or my struggles. I was simply the disappointing daughter who had failed to launch. "Brett, sweetheart, why don't you congratulate your sister?" Mom's voice carried a gentle but pointed suggestion that felt more like a command. Her silver hair was perfectly styled in a bob that emphasized her sharp cheekbones, and her emerald dress made her look years younger than her 55 years. Before I could muster a response, Uncle Frank reached for the remote control sitting on the coffee table. "Mind if I check the game scores?" he asked, already pointing the device toward our 75-inch television mounted on the living room wall. The screen flickered from the cooking show that had been playing in the background to a business news channel. The anchor's professional voice filled the room as she announced the breaking news segment. We now turn to this year's Forbes Billionaires List, featuring some surprising new entries in the technology sector. My blood turned to ice as the familiar Forbes logo appeared on screen, followed by a sleek graphic displaying the annual rankings that captivated business enthusiasts worldwide. Jennifer continued her animated conversation with Aunt Patricia about her first week at the law firm, describing the marble lobby and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lake Michigan. Her excitement was infectious, and even Cousin Marcus had put down his phone to listen to her stories about high-profile clients and complex litigation cases. Then the television screen changed everything. Among this year's most notable new billionaires is Brett Sullivan, founder and CEO of Neural Dynamics, whose revolutionary artificial intelligence platform has transformed the healthcare industry. The anchor announced with professional enthusiasm. A photograph of me appeared on screen, taken during a conference 6 months earlier where I had been the keynote speaker. In the image, I wore a black business suit and smiled confidently at the camera, looking nothing like the invisible family disappointment sitting at the dinner table. The room fell into absolute silence. Jennifer's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor and sending sparkling liquid across the Persian rug. The crystal fragments sparkled like tiny diamonds under the chandelier light. Uncle Frank's jaw dropped open, revealing his partially chewed dinner roll. Aunt Patricia gasped audibly, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Cousin Marcus stared at the television screen, then at me, then back at the screen, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Brett Sullivan, 28, has built her fortune, developing artificial intelligence systems that assist medical professionals in diagnosing rare diseases. The anchor continued oblivious to the chaos she was creating in our suburban dining room. Her company's valuation reached $2.4 billion following last month's acquisition by MedTech Industries. Mom's face had drained of all color. She gripped the edge of the dining table so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and her carefully applied makeup could not hide the shock etched across her features. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words emerged. The business segment continued with additional details about neural dynamics breakthrough technology, describing how my artificial intelligence platform had reduced diagnostic errors by 43% in clinical trials. They showed footage of our company headquarters in downtown Chicago, a gleaming 30-story building where 250 employees worked tirelessly to revolutionize medical care. For 3 years, I had been building this empire from my modest one-bedroom apartment, working 18-hour days, while my family assumed I was unemployed and directionless. I had deliberately kept my success hidden, planning to reveal everything gradually once I felt confident enough to handle their reactions. The plan had been to invite them to our company's annual gala next month, where I would finally share my achievements in a controlled environment. But fate had other plans. Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Brett, is that really you on television?" Her perfectly confident facade had cracked, revealing the vulnerability underneath. The sister who had always seemed untouchable suddenly looked fragile and confused. I nodded slowly, my throat too tight to speak. The weight of 3 years of secrecy pressed down on my shoulders like a physical burden. Every late-night coding session, every rejected investor pitch, every moment of doubt and determination had led to this surreal moment where my two worlds collided without warning. Uncle Frank pointed at the screen with a trembling finger. "That says $2.4 billion, Brett. Billion with a B." His voice cracked on the last word as if the number was too large for his vocal cords to handle properly. The television segment concluded with stock footage of medical professionals using our AI platform in hospitals across the country, their faces filled with the satisfaction that came from providing better patient care. The anchor moved on to the next story, but nobody in our dining room was listening anymore. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable, broken only by the gentle tick of Mom's antique grandfather clock and the distant sound of traffic on Maple Street. I could feel 8 pairs of eyes studying me as if I had suddenly transformed into a completely different person. Which in many ways, I suppose I had. The silence shattered like Jennifer's champagne glass when Mom finally found her voice, but instead of the apologetic tone I had hoped for, her words carried a sharp edge of accusation. "How could you keep this from us, Brett? We're your family." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that made everyone wince. Her emerald dress rustled as she paced toward the television, as if getting closer to the screen would somehow make the impossible news more comprehensible. Jennifer rose from her seat with the fluid grace she had perfected during her law school mock trials, her initial shock rapidly transforming into something far more dangerous. Her hazel eyes narrowed as she crossed her arms over her chest, and I recognized the calculating expression she wore whenever she prepared to demolish an opponent's argument. "You deliberately humiliated me tonight, didn't you?" She accused, her voice steady, despite the fury radiating from her posture. "On the one night that was supposed to be about my success, you arranged for this to happen." Jennifer I had no control over when Forbes chose to air this segment. I protested, but my words sounded weak, even to my own ears. The irony was not lost on me that after years of feeling invisible, I suddenly wished I could disappear entirely. Cousin Marcus, a stocky man in his early 30s, who worked as a car salesman in Milwaukee, stood up so quickly that his napkin fell to the floor. His round face had flushed red with excitement, and his small eyes gleamed with an intensity I had never seen before. "Brett, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means for all of us? Family takes care of family, right?" He spread his arms wide as if he wanted to embrace the entire room. I've been struggling with my mortgage payments, and Sarah needs braces for the kids." Aunt Patricia, Mom's younger sister, nodded vigorously while clutching her purse against her chest. Her graying blonde hair had come loose from its careful updo during all the excitement, and her blue eyes sparkled with tears that might have been joy or desperation. "Brett, honey, you know how difficult things have been since Patricia lost her job at the insurance company. Maybe you could help us with the medical bills from her surgery." Her voice carried the practiced, pleading tone of someone who had grown accustomed to asking for financial assistance. Uncle Frank, a tall man with thinning brown hair and calloused hands, from his work as a contractor, scratched his beard thoughtfully. $2.4 billion, he repeated slowly, as if saying the number aloud would help him process its magnitude. "That's enough to buy every house on this street plus the next 3 streets over." He looked directly at me with an expression I had never seen before, somewhere between awe and expectation. "Your old Uncle Frank could sure use a new truck for his business. The current one barely starts in cold weather." I felt like a deer caught in headlights as my relatives began circling me with their financial troubles and thinly veiled requests for money. These were the same people who had spent years treating me like a disappointment, who had ignored my achievements and dismissed my dreams. Now they saw me as their personal lottery ticket, and the transformation was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "Everyone, please just slow down," I said, raising my hands in a gesture that felt futile against the rising tide of demands. "This is all happening very fast, and I need time to process everything too. Building neural dynamics wasn't easy. There were 3 years of 18-hour days, countless rejections from investors who didn't believe in my vision, and nights when I survived on instant ramen, because every penny went toward research and development." But my words fell on deaf ears. Mom had returned to the table and was rifling through her purse with frantic movements, eventually producing her smartphone with its cracked screen protector. "I need to call everyone and share the wonderful news," she announced, her voice trembling with excitement. "The neighbors, my book club, your father's relatives in Minnesota. They won't believe it." "Mom, please don't," I pleaded, but she had already begun dialing her sister in Minneapolis. The same woman who had been ashamed to mention my name at social gatherings was now preparing to broadcast my success to anyone who would listen. Jennifer sat back down heavily, her professional composure completely abandoned, as she stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and something that looked dangerously close to hatred. "You've been lying to us for 3 years, she said quietly, her words carrying more venom than any shouting could have achieved. "Every family gathering, every holiday, every time Mom asked what you were doing with your life, you lied." "I wasn't lying." I defended myself, though the words felt hollow. I was protecting myself and my company. I wanted to be absolutely certain of my success before sharing it with anyone. The technology sector is volatile, and I needed to ensure neural dynamics was stable before going public with my involvement. "Protecting yourself from what?" Jennifer's voice rose an octave, and she gestured wildly at the opulent dining room around us. "From your family who loves you. From people who would have celebrated your success." The hypocrisy of her words hit me like a physical blow. This was the same family that had consistently overlooked my accomplishments while elevating Jennifer's every achievement. When I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in computer science, the celebration lasted exactly 1 dinner. When Jennifer passed the bar exam on her first try, Mom threw a party that lasted 3 days and invited half the neighborhood. Cousin Marcus had moved closer to my chair, and I could smell the cologne he had applied too liberally before dinner. His eager smile reminded me of a hungry salesman who had spotted a wealthy customer. "Brett, I've actually been thinking about starting my own business for years. Maybe we could discuss some investment opportunities. I have this brilliant idea for a chain of eco-friendly car washes that would revolutionize the industry." Marcus: "I appreciate your entrepreneurial spirit, but tonight really isn't the time for business pitches," I replied, trying to maintain some semblance of politeness while my world spun out of control around me. Uncle Frank had begun calculating figures on his napkin with a stubby pencil he had pulled from his shirt pocket. Let's see if you could spare just 1% of your wealth. That would be $24 million. Divided among the family members here tonight, that comes to about $3 million each. Not a bad return for being related to a genius. The casual way he discussed my money as if it already belonged to him made my stomach churn. These people had no understanding of the sacrifices I had made, the risks I had taken, or the responsibility that came with running a company that employed hundreds of people and served thousands of patients worldwide. Uncle Frank, my wealth isn't liquid cash sitting in a checking account, I explained, struggling to keep my voice level. Most of it exists as company stock and intellectual property. Neural Dynamics has ongoing research projects, employee salaries, and operational expenses that require careful financial management. But logic had no place in this conversation. Aunt Patricia was already describing her dream of retiring early to a condo in Florida, while Cousin Marcus had moved on to his second business idea involving artisanal pet food. Mom continued making phone calls, her voice growing more animated with each conversation as she shared the news of her newly discovered billionaire daughter. Jennifer stood up again and walked to the window that overlooked our childhood backyard, where the old oak tree still held the remnants of the rope swing Dad had built when we were children. Her reflection in the glass looked ghostly and distant, and when she spoke, her words were barely audible above the chaos surrounding us. You know what the worst part is, Brett? I actually believed you were struggling. I felt sorry for you. There were times when I considered offering to help you financially to give you a loan so you could get back on your feet. She turned away from the window and fixed me with a stare that could have frozen fire. I was worried about my little sister, and all this time you were building an empire. Her words revealed a truth that cut deeper than any financial demand from our relatives. In her own way, Jennifer had cared about me even if she had never shown it properly. The revelation that I had been successful while she pitied me had wounded her pride in a way that would be difficult to repair. The evening that had begun as a celebration of Jennifer's legal career had transformed into something unrecognizable. The pot roast grew cold on our plates while my family members continued planning how to spend money that wasn't theirs. The warm glow of family dinner had been replaced by the harsh glare of greed and resentment. As I sat surrounded by people who shared my DNA but suddenly felt like strangers, I realized that revealing my success had created problems I had never anticipated. The family dynamics that had always been complicated were now irreparably damaged, and I had no roadmap for navigating the treacherous waters ahead. But I was about to discover that this was only the beginning of a much larger storm. The weight of Jennifer's accusation hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle, and something inside me snapped with the brittle crack of breaking glass. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of enduring their pity and disappointment, and now she had the audacity to claim I had deliberately sabotaged her moment of triumph. The irony was so profound, it bordered on the absurd. You want to talk about deliberate sabotage, Jennifer? I stood slowly, my voice carrying a coldness that surprised even me. Let's discuss the real sabotage that's been happening in this family for years. Jennifer's perfectly composed expression faltered for just a moment, like a mask slipping before being hastily readjusted. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, but her voice lacked the conviction that usually accompanied her legal arguments. She moved away from the window and positioned herself behind Mom's chair as if seeking protection from whatever was coming next. Really? You have no memory of intercepting my phone calls from Microsoft when they wanted to interview me for their artificial intelligence research team 5 years ago. I pulled out my smartphone and opened the folder of screenshots I'd been saving for years, evidence I never thought I would actually need to use. Or perhaps you've forgotten about the email you sent to Professor Williams at Northwestern, claiming I had cheated on my senior thesis. The blood drained from Jennifer's face so quickly that I thought she might faint. Mom stopped her phone conversation mid-sentence and stared at both of us with growing alarm. Uncle Frank set down his calculator, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The entire room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "Brett, what are you talking about?" Mom's voice trembled with confusion and fear. Why would Jennifer do something like that to her own sister? I walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner of the dining room, the same piece of furniture where Mom had helped us with homework throughout our childhood. From my purse, I retrieved a manila folder I had brought with the intention of finally sharing my success story. Instead, it would serve a much different purpose. 5 years ago, I was recruited by 3 major technology companies. I began opening the folder to reveal printed emails, phone logs, and handwritten notes. Microsoft, Google, and Apple all wanted to interview me for positions in their artificial intelligence divisions. These weren't entry-level jobs, Mom. These were senior positions with starting salaries in the 6-figure range. Jennifer's eyes darted toward the front door, and I could see her calculating whether she could escape this conversation entirely. But she was trapped by the dining room table on one side, and Uncle Frank's considerable bulk blocking the other exit. Cousin Marcus had stopped discussing his business ventures and was watching our exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a car accident in slow motion. I never received a single call back from any of those companies. I continued spreading the evidence across the mahogany table like a prosecutor presenting her case to a jury. For years, I assumed I had somehow failed their initial screening process. I blamed myself, convinced that I wasn't smart enough or qualified enough for their standards. Mom picked up one of the printed emails, squinting at the small text without her reading glasses. "This is addressed to Jennifer Sullivan at her law school email account." She read aloud, her voice growing smaller with each word. "Thank you for bringing your sister's academic dishonesty to our attention. We will be withdrawing our job offer immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer opened her mouth to speak, but no words emerged. Her usual articulate confidence had vanished completely, leaving behind a woman who looked lost and desperate. Her carefully styled hair had begun to fall out of place, and her navy blazer suddenly seemed too large for her diminished frame. Jennifer, Mom's voice carried a note of disbelief that cut through the tension like a knife. "Please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you didn't sabotage your sister's career opportunities." "You don't understand the pressure I was under." Jennifer finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the tick of the grandfather clock. "Law school was incredibly competitive, and everyone expected me to be perfect. You and Dad always talked about how brilliant Brett was, how she could do anything she wanted with computers. I was afraid that if she got one of those prestigious jobs, nobody would notice my accomplishments anymore." Aunt Patricia gasped audibly, pressing her hand to her chest, as if Jennifer's confession had physically wounded her. "How could you do that to your own sister?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine horror. "Family is supposed to support each other, not tear each other down." I pulled out another document, this one, a phone log from my cell phone company that I had requested 3 years earlier when I began suspecting something was wrong. This shows 17 incoming calls from Microsoft's Human Resources Department that were never forwarded to me. They all went to voicemail, but somehow those voicemails disappeared from my phone. Jennifer's shoulders sagged in defeat as she realized the extent of evidence I had gathered. "I was home for Christmas break when those calls came in." She admitted, her voice hollow and distant. "I answered your phone a few times when you were in the shower or helping Mom with dinner. They left detailed messages about interview times and procedures, and I deleted them." The confession hit the room like a physical force, causing Uncle Frank to curse under his breath and Cousin Marcus to shake his head in disbelief. Mom sank into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her weight, and her carefully applied makeup began to smear as tears formed in her eyes. "But it gets worse." I continued, my voice growing stronger as years of suppressed anger finally found their outlet. "Jennifer, do you want to tell everyone about the real inspiration behind your signature legal case at Whitman and Associates? The one that earned you this promotion we're supposedly celebrating tonight." Jennifer's face went completely white, and she gripped the back of Mom's chair so tightly that her knuckles stood out like mountain peaks against her pale skin. "Brett, please don't," she whispered. And for the first time in our adult lives, I heard genuine fear in her voice. But I was beyond mercy. 3 years of building my company while enduring their pity and disappointment had hardened something inside me, and Jennifer's betrayal deserved to be exposed completely. 6 months ago, I anonymously donated 50 hours of legal research to the Chicago Legal Aid Society. The research focused on protecting low-income families from predatory lending practices, and it included detailed case studies and precedent analysis. Mom looked confused by the change in direction, but I could see understanding beginning to dawn in Jennifer's eyes. She knew exactly where this story was heading, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. That research was used to help 12 families save their homes from foreclosure. I continued pulling out the final piece of evidence from my folder. The case received significant media attention because of its innovative legal arguments and thorough preparation. Jennifer, would you like to explain to everyone how those arguments ended up in your portfolio when you applied for the junior attorney position? The room seemed to shrink around us as the implications of my words sank in. Jennifer had built her career advancement on legal work that I had provided for free to help struggling families, and she had claimed credit for research that had saved people's homes and livelihoods. "I found the research in the legal aid database," Jennifer said weakly, her voice lacking any conviction. "It wasn't attributed to anyone specific, so I assumed it was public domain work that anyone could reference." "The research was submitted under the name B. Sullivan," I replied, holding up the original submission receipt. "You knew it was mine, Jennifer. You've always known that I volunteer my technical skills to help nonprofit organizations. You took my work, presented it as your own, and used it to launch your legal career." Uncle Frank whistled low under his breath, a sound that somehow conveyed more disapproval than any words could have managed. "That's lower than I thought anyone in this family could sink," he muttered, shaking his head in disgust. Cousin Marcus, who had been silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke up with a voice filled with disappointment. "Jennifer, how could you steal credit for work that was helping families keep their homes? That's not just betraying Brett, that's betraying people who were counting on that legal help." Mom looked as if she had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. Her perfectly styled silver hair seemed duller, and her emerald dress had lost its vibrant color under the harsh fluorescent light that someone had switched on during the confrontation. "I don't understand how my daughters could treat each other this way," she said softly, her voice breaking on the last word. Jennifer straightened her shoulders and tried to recover some of her legal training, but her voice still trembled as she attempted to mount a defense. "Brett, you never told anyone you were volunteering for legal aid organizations. How was I supposed to know that anonymous research belonged to you? Because you've been monitoring my activities for years." I replied, pulling out one final document that I had hoped never to use. "This is a screenshot from your laptop browser history, Jennifer. You've been visiting my company's website regularly under assumed names, reading our press releases, and tracking our progress. You knew exactly what I was building, and you were terrified that my success would overshadow your accomplishments." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Jennifer's carefully constructed image as the successful ethical attorney crumbled completely as the truth of her systematic sabotage became clear. She had spent years undermining my opportunities while building her own career on foundations of lies and stolen work. But as satisfying as it felt to finally expose her betrayal, I realized that this confrontation was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Jennifer's legal training and professional connections would not be abandoned easily, and I had just declared war on someone who knew how to fight dirty in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. The family dinner that had begun with celebration was now a battlefield, and the real conflict was just beginning. The week following our disastrous family dinner passed in an eerie calm that reminded me of the stillness before a thunderstorm. Jennifer had left Mom's house without another word, gathering her purse and coat with the mechanical precision of someone in shock. She ignored Mom's tearful pleas to stay and discuss what had happened, brushing past Uncle Frank and Cousin Marcus, as if they were mere furniture blocking her path to escape. I should have recognized that silence as a warning. On Wednesday morning, I was reviewing quarterly projections in my corner office on the 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower when my assistant Caroline burst through the doors with an expression of panic that immediately set my nerves on edge. Her usually pristine blonde bob was disheveled, and her professional composure had cracked like ice under pressure. "Brett, we have a serious problem," she announced, clutching a manila envelope against her chest as if it contained explosive materials. "Legal documents were just delivered by courier, and they're not good." My stomach dropped as I accepted the envelope, noting the return address from Henderson, Blackwell and Associates, one of Chicago's most aggressive litigation firms. The letterhead alone was enough to make most business owners nervous, but seeing my name and Neural Dynamics listed as defendants made my blood run cold. The first document was a temporary restraining order filed in Cook County Circuit Court alleging that Neural Dynamics had stolen proprietary artificial intelligence algorithms from an unnamed competitor. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the implications were crystal clear. Someone was attempting to freeze my company's assets and halt all business operations pending a full investigation. The second document was even worse. It was a federal lawsuit filed with the Northern District of Illinois claiming that I had engaged in fraudulent business practices, manipulated financial statements to deceive investors, and violated multiple securities regulations during Neural Dynamics' initial public offering 6 months earlier. The damages sought exceeded $500 million, more than enough to destroy my company and personal wealth entirely. But it was the third document that confirmed my worst suspicions about the source of this legal assault. An affidavit signed by Jennifer Sullivan Esquire, swearing under oath that she possessed evidence of my criminal activities and would testify as a key witness for the prosecution. Her signature was bold and confident, the same flowing script she had practiced during countless homework assignments at Mom's dining room table. "Caroline, please get David Chen from our legal department up here immediately," I instructed, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Also, contact Sarah Martinez at Goldman Sachs and schedule an emergency conference call with our board of directors for this afternoon." As Caroline rushed out to execute my instructions, I sank into my leather desk chair and stared out at the Chicago skyline, wondering how Jennifer had managed to orchestrate such a comprehensive attack in less than a week. The legal filings were sophisticated and well coordinated, suggesting that she had help from experienced white-collar defense attorneys who specialized in corporate warfare. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, but I recognized Jennifer's writing style immediately. "You should have kept your mouth shut at dinner, little sister. Some secrets are too dangerous to reveal. Withdraw your accusations and we can make this all disappear." The threat was clear, but Jennifer had underestimated my resolve. 3 years of building Neural Dynamics from nothing had taught me how to fight battles that seemed impossible to win. I had survived rejections from dozens of investors, weathered product failures that nearly bankrupted the company, and overcome technical challenges that caused other entrepreneurs to abandon their dreams entirely. David Chen arrived within minutes, his usually calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of a lawyer preparing for war. At 35, he was one of the most respected intellectual property attorneys in Chicago, and his track record of defeating frivolous lawsuits was exactly why I had recruited him from his previous firm 18 months earlier. "These filings are professionally executed, but legally weak," David announced after reviewing the documents with the thoroughness that had made his reputation. "The temporary restraining order relies on hearsay evidence and unsubstantiated claims about algorithm theft. We can get it dissolved within 48 hours if we move quickly." "What about the federal lawsuit?" I asked, though I suspected his analysis would be equally optimistic. "More concerning but still defendable," David replied, loosening his burgundy tie as he settled into strategy mode. "The securities fraud allegations are serious, but they'll need concrete evidence to support their claims. Our financial records are clean, and our IPO process was handled by some of the most reputable firms in the industry. David, there's something else you need to know. I said, deciding that complete honesty was essential given the circumstances. The primary witness against us is my sister Jennifer, and this lawsuit is retaliation for a family dispute that became public knowledge last week. David's eyebrows rose slightly, but his professional composure remained intact. That's actually helpful information, Brett. If we can demonstrate that this litigation is motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate legal concerns, we can petition for sanctions against the opposing counsel and potentially seek damages for malicious prosecution. My phone rang with the distinctive tone I had assigned to emergency calls from our board members. Sarah Martinez's voice filled the office through the speakerphone, carrying the tension that came with managing billion-dollar investment portfolios during times of crisis. Brett, we've seen the news reports about the lawsuit and our investors are getting nervous, Sarah announced without preamble. Neural Dynamics' stock price dropped 12% in the first hour of trading, and we're fielding calls from institutional investors who want reassurance about the company's legal exposure. The financial implications hit me like a physical blow. 12% of our market capitalization represented nearly $300 million in lost investor value, and that was just the beginning. If Jennifer's legal assault continued to gain traction, the damage to Neural Dynamics could be irreversible. Sarah, I want to be completely transparent with the board about what we're facing, I said, choosing my words carefully since David was taking notes for potential legal proceedings. This lawsuit appears to be motivated by personal rather than professional considerations, and we're confident that our legal team can demonstrate the frivolous nature of these claims. What kind of personal considerations? Sarah's voice carried the sharp edge that made her one of the most feared negotiators on Wall Street. She'd not built her career by accepting vague explanations or corporate doublespeak. I explained the family dinner revelation and Jennifer's subsequent retaliation, watching David's expression grow more serious as he realized the complexity of our situation. Fighting corporate litigation was challenging enough when the opposing side was motivated by profit, but personal vendettas introduced unpredictable elements that could not be managed through traditional legal strategies. This is worse than I initially thought, Sarah admitted after I finished my explanation. Personal disputes can be incredibly destructive to business relationships, especially when they involve family members who have inside knowledge of company operations. She was absolutely right, and I was beginning to understand the true scope of Jennifer's strategy. As my sister, she had overheard countless conversations about neural dynamics during family gatherings where I thought nobody was paying attention to my work. She knew about our research partnerships, our intellectual property development process, and our financial management strategies. That insider knowledge made her a formidable opponent who could attack our most vulnerable points with surgical precision. There's more. I continued dreading the additional disclosure I needed to make. Jennifer has been systematically sabotaging my career opportunities for years, including intercepting job offers from major technology companies and stealing credit for legal research I donated to help low-income families. The silence on the speakerphone stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Sarah responded with the clinical detachment that had made her legendary in investment circles. Brett, you're describing a pattern of behavior that suggests your sister is willing to engage in sustained criminal activity to advance her own interests. That level of malicious intent makes her extremely dangerous as a legal adversary. David was furiously scribbling notes on his yellow legal pad, and I could see him developing strategies in real time as he processed the information we were sharing. Actually, Sarah's observation gives us several avenues for counterattack, he said, looking up from his notes with renewed confidence. If we can document Jennifer's history of fraudulent behavior, we can petition the court to dismiss her testimony as inherently unreliable. But even as we discussed legal strategies and defensive maneuvers, I knew that Jennifer's assault on Neural Dynamics was just the opening salvo in a much larger war. She had spent her entire adult life learning how to destroy opponents through systematic legal pressure, and she would not be deterred by a single court defeat. My phone buzzed with another text message, this time from Mom. "Brett, please call me. Jennifer says you're trying to destroy her career, and I don't know what to believe anymore. This family is falling apart." The personal cost of this battle was becoming as significant as the professional damage. Jennifer's strategy was not just aimed at neural dynamics, but at isolating me from our family and forcing me to choose between my business success and my relationships with people I loved. But Jennifer had made one critical miscalculation in her war against me. She assumed that I would be intimidated by legal pressure and family manipulation, just as I had been intimidated by her superior achievements throughout our childhood. She did not understand that building a billion-dollar company from nothing had fundamentally changed who I was as a person. The quiet, invisible sister who had accepted second-place status for years no longer existed. In her place stood a CEO who had learned how to fight battles against opponents who were bigger, wealthier, and more experienced than she was. Jennifer was about to discover that corporate warfare was far more brutal than family disputes, and I had 3 years of hard-won experience in surviving challenges that would have destroyed most people. The real battle was just beginning. 3 days after Jennifer's legal assault began, Mom called me with a voice so strained and fragile that I barely recognized it as belonging to the confident woman who had raised 2 daughters and managed a household with military precision for decades. The conversation started with pleasantries about the weather and her garden, but I could hear the underlying tension that meant she was building courage to address something difficult. "Brett, honey, I need you to come to dinner on Sunday." She finally said her words carrying the weight of a formal request rather than a casual family invitation. "Jennifer will be there, and we need to resolve this situation before it destroys our entire family." My first instinct was to decline politely and suggest that Jennifer and I needed time to cool down before attempting any family reconciliation. But the exhaustion in Mom's voice told a different story. One of a woman caught between 2 daughters who were tearing each other apart while she watched helplessly from the sidelines. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea right now," I replied gently, staring out my office window at the Chicago River far below. "Jennifer has initiated legal proceedings against my company, and my attorneys have advised me not to have any direct contact with her until this matter is resolved." Legal proceedings. Mom's voice rose an octave, and I could picture her gripping the telephone with both hands the way she did when receiving distressing news. "What kind of legal proceedings? Jennifer told me you were just having a business disagreement that could be worked out through normal channels." The innocence in her question broke my heart. Mom still believed that her daughter's conflict was a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved with honest conversation and mutual apologies, the same approach she had used to mediate our childhood arguments over borrowed clothes and homework help. She had no idea that Jennifer's legal attack could destroy neural dynamics and eliminate thousands of jobs in the process. Mom, Jennifer has filed lawsuits claiming that I stole artificial intelligence technology and committed securities fraud. I explained, trying to keep my voice gentle despite the seriousness of the charges. "These aren't minor business disagreements. These are federal criminal allegations that could result in prison time if they were proven true." The silence that followed was so complete that I wondered if our connection had been dropped. When Mom finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Prison time, Brett, surely there's been some kind of mistake. Jennifer would never do something that could send her sister to prison." But even as she said the words, I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. The revelation of Jennifer's systematic sabotage during our dinner had shaken Mom's fundamental beliefs about her eldest daughter's character. The perfect child who had never disappointed her was gradually being revealed as someone capable of calculated cruelty. "Has Jennifer explained to you why she's taking these legal actions?" I asked, knowing that my sister's version of events would be carefully crafted to maintain her image as the wronged party. Jennifer's legal training had taught her how to present facts in ways that supported her preferred narrative while technically remaining truthful. She says you've been running a fraudulent business for years and that she discovered evidence of criminal activity during her legal research, Mom replied, and I could hear her reading from notes she had taken during their conversation. She claims that as an officer of the court, she has a moral obligation to report suspected crimes to the appropriate authorities. The sophistication of Jennifer's manipulation was breathtaking. By framing her attack as a moral imperative rather than personal revenge, she had positioned herself as a reluctant whistleblower who was simply fulfilling her professional duties. The strategy was designed to win sympathy from Mom while deflecting attention from her true motivations. "Mom, do you remember the evidence I showed everyone at dinner last Sunday?" I asked, pulling out the manila folder that had become my constant companion over the past week. The intercepted phone calls, the stolen legal research, the systematic sabotage of my career opportunities. Does that sound like the behavior of someone concerned about moral obligations? "I remember," Mom said quietly, and I could hear her shifting in what I knew was her favorite armchair beside the living room window. "But Jennifer says she was protecting me from the embarrassment of having a daughter involved in criminal activities. She says she was trying to spare our family from public scandal." The twisted logic was vintage Jennifer turning her betrayal into an act of family protection, while simultaneously positioning herself as the daughter who truly cared about Mom's reputation. It was emotional manipulation at its most skillful, and I realized that Jennifer had been working on Mom for days, slowly eroding her confidence in my version of events. "What do you believe, Mom?" I asked, knowing that her answer would determine not just our family's future, but my own emotional survival during the legal battle ahead. "Do you believe I'm a criminal who has been deceiving everyone for years? Or do you believe that Jennifer is retaliating against me for exposing her sabotage?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire, and I could hear Mom struggling with a choice that no parent should ever have to make. She was being forced to decide which daughter was telling the truth and which was lying, a decision that would inevitably damage her relationship with one of us permanently. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she finally admitted, her voice breaking with the weight of maternal anguish. "I've spent 48 hours going back and forth between your versions of what happened, and I can't reconcile how both of my daughters could see the same events so differently." "Mom, there's something else you need to know," I said, making a decision that would either save our relationship or destroy it completely. "Jennifer's legal assault isn't just about punishing me for exposing her sabotage. She's trying to gain access to Dad's inheritance trust." I heard Mom gasp audibly and the sound of papers rustling as she apparently knocked something over in her surprise. The inheritance trust was a topic that had been carefully avoided in our family discussions for 2 years, ever since Dad's attorney had revealed its unusual provisions during the reading of his will. "How do you know about the trust?" Mom asked, her voice suddenly sharp with the alertness that meant I had touched on something significant. "The attorney said those details were confidential until certain conditions were met." "Because I'm the primary beneficiary," I replied, sharing information that I had been legally prohibited from discussing until now. Dad established a trust fund containing $2 million in assets, but the money can only be released if you sign a declaration stating that I'm mentally competent and financially responsible. The implications hung between us like a bridge that neither of us was certain we wanted to cross. Dad's trust had been designed to provide financial security for his daughters, but the competency requirement meant that Mom held ultimate authority over accessing those funds. If she signed the declaration, I would receive the inheritance. If she refused, the money would remain locked away indefinitely. "Jennifer's been asking me about signing legal documents related to your competency," Mom said slowly, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place in her mind. "She said it was routine paperwork that needed to be filed with your company's corporate records, but she needed my signature as your closest relative." The scope of Jennifer's manipulation was becoming clear. She had been using her legal expertise to convince Mom to sign documents that would effectively declare me mentally incompetent, which would not only block access to Dad's inheritance, but also provide evidence for her lawsuits claiming that I was unfit to run a major corporation. "Mom, did you sign anything Jennifer gave you?" I asked, my heart pounding as I realized how close my sister had come to completely destroying my legal standing. "No," Mom replied, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me like cool water on a burning fever. "Something about the documents felt wrong, and I decided to wait until I could discuss them with you first. Jennifer wasn't happy about the delay." I was beginning to understand that Mom's intuition had saved not just my inheritance, but potentially my entire company. If she had signed Jennifer's fraudulent competency documents, my sister would have possessed legal ammunition that could have been devastating in both criminal and civil proceedings. "Mom, I need you to understand something very important," I said, choosing my words with the care of someone diffusing an explosive device. "Jennifer's legal actions against me aren't separate from her attempts to get you to sign those documents. She's conducting a coordinated attack designed to prove that I'm mentally incompetent and criminally irresponsible." "But why would she do something like that?" Mom asked, her voice carrying the bewilderment of someone whose fundamental assumptions about her family were being systematically dismantled. "Even if you two are having problems, Jennifer would never try to hurt you this badly." "Because she's desperate," I replied, finally understanding Jennifer's psychological state with crystal clarity. Her entire identity is built on being the successful daughter, the one who exceeded expectations while I disappointed everyone. Learning that I built a billion-dollar company while she was still celebrating entry-level promotions shattered her self-image completely. The truth was harsh, but undeniable. Jennifer's systematic sabotage of my opportunities had been motivated by deep-seated insecurity and competitive jealousy that had festered for years beneath her professional success. The revelation of neural dynamics value had exposed her feelings of inadequacy in a way that made rational behavior impossible. "What am I supposed to do?" Mom asked, and her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying impossible emotional burdens for too long. "How am I supposed to choose between my daughters when both of you are asking me to take sides in something I don't completely understand?" The question was fair and heartbreaking in equal measure. Mom had raised two daughters who were now engaged in a war that threatened to destroy everything she had built over decades of sacrifice and love. No matter which side she chose, she would lose one of us, and the knowledge of that inevitable loss was tearing her apart. "You don't have to choose sides, Mom," I said, though we both knew that neutrality was becoming increasingly impossible as Jennifer's legal assault escalated. "You just have to decide who you trust to tell you the truth, even when that truth is difficult to accept." But as our conversation ended with promises to talk again soon and expressions of love that felt fragile and uncertain, I knew that Mom was being forced into an impossible situation that would define our family's future. Jennifer's strategy was not just aimed at destroying my company, but at isolating me from the people whose support I needed most. The battle for Mom's loyalty was becoming as important as the legal war being fought in Chicago's courtrooms, and Jennifer held significant advantages in both arenas. She had years of experience manipulating family dynamics to her benefit, and she understood exactly which emotional pressure points would cause the most damage. But I had advantages too, ones that Jennifer had not anticipated. 3 years of building neural dynamics had taught me how to fight battles against superior opponents, and I had learned that victory often went to the person who was willing to endure the most pain rather than the person with the most resources. The war for my family's future was just beginning. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source on a gray Tuesday morning, when Caroline knocked on my office door with an expression that somehow managed to combine excitement and apprehension in equal measure. She held a thick manila envelope marked with the logo of Sterling Investigations, the private detective firm that David Chen had recommended 3 weeks earlier, when Jennifer's legal assault showed no signs of abating. "Brett, the investigators found something big," Caroline announced, setting the envelope on my desk with the reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts. "Marcus Sterling wants to meet with you and David immediately. He says this could change everything." Marcus Sterling was a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate fraud investigations, and his reputation for uncovering hidden evidence had made him the preferred investigator for Chicago's most prominent law firms. His fees were astronomical, but David had insisted that only the best would be sufficient for the battle we were fighting against Jennifer's coordinated legal attack. 30 minutes later, I sat in the conference room on Neural Dynamics' 34th floor, watching Marcus spread photographs and documents across the polished mahogany table, with the methodical precision of someone who had spent decades building criminal cases. At 52, he still possessed the sharp eyes and careful attention to detail that had made him legendary during his law enforcement career. "Your sister made a critical mistake," Marcus began, without preamble, his gravelly voice carrying the authority that came from years of interrogating suspects and witnesses. She assumed that her law firm's internal communications would remain confidential, but she underestimated how thoroughly we could investigate her professional relationships. He pointed to a series of bank statements spread across the left side of the table, each one bearing the letterhead of Whitman and Associates and marked with red circles around specific transactions. "These are financial records from your sister's law firm obtained through legitimate discovery processes in an unrelated case. Notice the pattern of withdrawals from the client trust account over the past 8 months." David leaned forward to examine the documents more closely, his expression growing increasingly serious as he recognized the implications of what Marcus had uncovered. "These withdrawals total nearly $400,000, he observed, tracing the highlighted amounts with his finger. "That's a significant sum for a junior attorney to be handling, especially when those funds were designated for client settlements and should never have been touched," Marcus replied, pulling out another set of documents that made my stomach drop. "Your sister has been systematically embezzling money from clients who won personal injury and medical malpractice cases. She's been using those stolen funds to finance her legal attack against Neural Dynamics." The scope of Jennifer's criminal behavior was breathtaking. She had not only sabotaged my career and stolen credit for my legal research, but she had also betrayed the trust of vulnerable clients who depended on their settlement money for medical bills and living expenses. The families she had helped in her signature case were not the only ones affected by her greed. "There's more." Marcus continued producing a folder filled with email printouts and phone records. "We traced the financial relationship between Whitman and Associates and Henderson Blackwell and Associates, the firm that filed the lawsuits against you. Jennifer has been funneling embezzled client money to pay for legal services that her own firm couldn't ethically provide." David whistled low under his breath, a sound that conveyed both admiration for Marcus's investigative skills and horror at the criminal conspiracy we were uncovering. "She created a shell arrangement to hide the conflict of interest," he said, reading through the email exchanges between the two law firms. "Whitman and Associates couldn't sue Neural Dynamics because it would violate their professional ethics rules, so Jennifer hired Henderson Blackwell as a proxy while secretly funding their operations. But that's not the most damaging evidence we've found." Marcus said, his expression growing even more serious as he pulled out a digital recording device from his briefcase. "Jennifer made a critical error 3 days ago when she met with her co-conspirators at Henderson Blackwell. She assumed their conference room was secure, but she failed to notice the court reporter who was working late in the adjacent office." He pressed the play button and Jennifer's voice filled the conference room with crystal clarity. "The key is to destroy Brett's credibility before she can expose what I've been doing. If we can convince the court that she's mentally unstable and criminally irresponsible, nobody will believe her accusations about the client money I've been borrowing." My hands trembled as I listened to my sister casually discussing strategies for framing me as a criminal while acknowledging her own theft from vulnerable clients. The recording continued for 12 minutes, documenting a conversation that revealed the full scope of her conspiracy against Neural Dynamics and her plans to steal Dad's inheritance trust by having me declared incompetent. This recording was obtained legally by a court reporter who was authorized to be in the building. Marcus explained stopping the playback before Jennifer's voice could inflict any more emotional damage. It's admissible evidence in both criminal and civil proceedings, and it completely undermines every allegation she's made against you and your company. David was already reaching for his phone to contact the U.S. Attorney's Office, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. "There's one more thing you need to see before we involve law enforcement," he said, producing a final set of documents that made my breath catch in my throat. The papers were copies of checks and bank transfers showing that Jennifer had forged Dad's signature on estate documents 5 years ago, stealing nearly $300,000 that had been designated for my college education fund. The money I had assumed was unavailable had actually been embezzled by my own sister to pay for her law school tuition and living expenses. "Your father established 2 educational trusts," Marcus explained, pointing to the legal documents that proved Dad's original intentions. "One for Jennifer's undergraduate studies, which she used legitimately, and one for your graduate education, which she accessed through forged signatures and fraudulent bank transfers." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, not just because of the stolen money, but because of what it represented. Jennifer's betrayal of our family had begun years before I realized we were enemies. While I struggled to pay for my computer science education through student loans and part-time jobs, she had been living comfortably on money that Dad had specifically set aside for my future. "She's been planning this for years," I said, my voice barely audible as the full scope of her systematic destruction became clear. Every setback I faced, every opportunity that disappeared, every moment when I felt like I was failing despite my best efforts. She orchestrated all of it. Marcus nodded grimly, his expression reflecting the disgust that came from spending a career investigating human corruption. "Your sister is a sophisticated criminal who has been using her legal training to cover her tracks for years. The embezzlement from clients, the forged estate documents, the fraudulent lawsuits against your company. This is a pattern of behavior that demonstrates premeditation and criminal intent." "What's our next move?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, leaving Jennifer with no possible defense against criminal prosecution and civil liability. "We contact the U.S. Attorney's Office immediately and request a meeting to present evidence of criminal conspiracy, embezzlement, and fraud," Marcus replied, beginning to organize his documents into folders marked with different criminal charges. "We also file emergency motions to dismiss all pending litigation against Neural Dynamics and request sanctions against Henderson, Blackwell, and Associates for participating in frivolous lawsuits." But even as we discussed legal strategies and criminal referrals, I knew that exposing Jennifer's crimes would carry emotional costs that extended far beyond the corporate warfare she had initiated. Mom would be devastated to learn that her eldest daughter was a criminal who had betrayed not just her sister, but vulnerable clients who trusted her with their financial security. "There's one more thing we need to consider," I said, looking at both Marcus and David with the weight of family loyalty pressing down on my shoulders. "Once we turn this evidence over to law enforcement, Jennifer will face federal criminal charges that could result in decades in prison. Despite everything she's done, she's still my sister, and destroying her life completely feels like a line I'm not sure I'm ready to cross." Marcus and David exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their professional experience with family conflicts that evolved into criminal cases. They had seen this moral dilemma many times before, watching victims struggle with the decision to prosecute relatives who had betrayed them through systematic criminal behavior. "Brett, I understand your reluctance." David said gently, his voice carrying the compassion that had made him not just an effective attorney, but a trusted advisor during the most difficult period of my life. But Jennifer has made this choice for you. She initiated criminal proceedings against you based on fabricated evidence, while simultaneously embezzling money from clients who depended on her professional integrity. He's right, Marcus added, his tone reflecting years of watching criminals escape justice because their victims were too kind-hearted to pursue appropriate consequences. Jennifer will not stop her attack on you and your company until she's forced to stop through legal intervention. Showing mercy to someone who has demonstrated no mercy toward you is not just naive, it's dangerous. As I sat in that conference room surrounded by evidence of my sister's systematic betrayal, I realized that the choice was not really mine to make. Jennifer had chosen her path years ago when she first decided to sabotage my opportunities out of jealousy and insecurity. Every crime she had committed since then had been another step down a road that led inevitably to this moment of accountability. The war between us was about to end, but the victory would come at a cost that would change our family forever. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the Chicago Convention Center's Grand Ballroom, looking out at an audience of 800 entrepreneurs, investors, and business leaders who had gathered for the annual Tech Innovation Conference. The same spotlight that once felt intimidating now felt like a warm embrace as I prepared to deliver the keynote address that would mark not just my company's triumph, but my personal transformation from invisible daughter to respected leader. 18 months ago, I was sitting in my childhood dining room listening to my family celebrate my sister's promotion to junior attorney while treating me like a disappointment who had failed to launch. I began my voice carrying the confidence that came from surviving battles that would have destroyed most people. Tonight, Neural Dynamics employs over 400 people. Our artificial intelligence platform has helped diagnose rare diseases in 37 countries. And we've established the Sullivan Foundation to support young entrepreneurs from unsupportive families. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it over the memory of Mom's voice on the phone 3 weeks earlier, when she had finally called to apologize for the years of favoritism and emotional neglect that had enabled Jennifer's criminal behavior. The conversation had been painful but necessary, clearing away decades of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding that had poisoned our relationship. Jennifer's criminal trial had concluded 2 months earlier with her conviction on 14 federal charges, including embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence Marcus Sterling had gathered proved overwhelming, and Jennifer's guilty plea had been accompanied by a tearful admission that her jealousy and insecurity had driven her to commit crimes that betrayed not just her sister, but the vulnerable clients who had trusted her with their financial security. The judge had sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison, along with restitution payments that would consume her assets for decades to come. Whitman and Associates had been dissolved following investigations that revealed systemic corruption involving multiple partners, and Henderson, Blackwell and Associates had lost their licenses to practice law after their participation in Jennifer's fraudulent conspiracy was exposed. But the most important victory had been personal rather than legal. Mom had gradually come to understand how her favoritism had contributed to the toxic family dynamics that enabled Jennifer's criminal behavior, and she had begun the difficult work of rebuilding relationships based on honesty rather than comparison and competition. The Sullivan Foundation has already provided scholarships to 60 young entrepreneurs whose families dismiss their dreams as unrealistic. I continued noting the faces in the audience that reflected recognition and empathy. We've funded legal aid for small businesses facing fraudulent attacks, and we've established mentorship programs connecting successful entrepreneurs with young people who need guidance and support rather than criticism and doubt. The foundation had become my way of transforming personal pain into purposeful action, using the financial success of Neural Dynamics to help other people overcome the same obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable in my own life. Every scholarship recipient and every mentorship match represented a victory over the forces of discouragement and family dysfunction that had nearly destroyed my potential. After the conference concluded, I drove to Mom's house for our weekly Sunday dinner, a tradition we had reestablished once the criminal trials were over and our family began the slow process of healing. The familiar neighborhood looked the same as it had during my childhood, but everything felt different now that we approached each other with honesty rather than pretense. "I'm proud of you, Brett," Mom said as we sat in her living room sharing tea and homemade cookies while watching the sun set through the windows that overlooked her garden. "Not just because of your business success, but because of the grace you've shown during this entire ordeal. A lesser person would have used Jennifer's crimes to seek revenge, but you've turned your pain into something that helps other people." The conversation felt surreal after years of feeling invisible in this same room, but Mom's transformation had been as profound as my own. The woman who had once dismissed my achievements while celebrating Jennifer's every accomplishment had learned to see her daughters as individuals rather than competitors, and our relationship had grown stronger than it had ever been during my childhood. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," I admitted, holding my teacup with both hands to absorb its warmth. "I think he would be proud of how we've rebuilt our family after everything that happened. He always believed that people could change if they were willing to do the difficult work of examining their mistakes honestly." Mom's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of healing rather than grief. "Your father loved both of his daughters equally, Brett. I was the one who created competition where there should have been cooperation. I was so afraid that Jennifer would feel overshadowed by your intelligence that I overcompensated by giving her attention and praise while taking your achievements for granted." The admission was painful but necessary, representing the kind of honest self-reflection that made genuine reconciliation possible. We had both learned that healing family relationships required acknowledging uncomfortable truths about past behavior, while committing to different choices in the future. My phone buzzed with a text message from Caroline updating me about Neural Dynamics' latest milestone. Our artificial intelligence platform had just received approval from the European Union's regulatory authorities, opening markets that would allow us to help even more patients worldwide. The company that had begun as a desperate attempt to prove my worth had evolved into something far more meaningful, a vehicle for improving human lives through technological innovation. "I have some news to share," I said, reaching into my purse to retrieve a document I had been saving for this moment. Neural Dynamics is going to acquire the intellectual property assets of 3 smaller AI companies that went bankrupt during the recession. We'll be hiring their former employees and incorporating their research into our expanded platform for diagnosing autoimmune diseases. Mom's face lit up with the genuine pride that had been missing from our relationship for so many years. "That's wonderful, Brett. How many new jobs will this create?" "Approximately 120 positions." I replied, feeling the satisfaction that came from success that benefited other people rather than just personal achievement. "We're also establishing a research partnership with Northwestern University's medical school, which means some of our innovations will be developed right here in Chicago." As our evening together drew to a close, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment of peace and mutual respect. The family dinner that had begun with painful comparisons and hidden resentments had ultimately led to justice, healing, and a stronger foundation for our future relationships. Jennifer's criminal behavior had been inexcusable, but it had also forced our family to confront long-standing patterns of dysfunction that needed to be addressed. Her conviction and imprisonment had been necessary consequences for choices that had harmed not just me, but vulnerable clients who trusted her professional integrity. But perhaps more importantly, the crisis had created opportunities for growth and healing that would never have been possible if we had continued pretending that our family dynamics were healthy and functional. Mom and I had learned to see each other clearly for the first time, building a relationship based on honesty, rather than the toxic competition that had defined our interactions for decades. "I love you, Brett," Mom said as I prepared to leave for my downtown apartment. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say that properly." "I love you too, Mom," I replied, hugging her with the warmth that came from forgiveness freely given and gratefully received. We've both learned a lot about what really matters in life. Driving through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood, I thought about the young entrepreneurs who would benefit from the Sullivan Foundation's programs and the patients whose lives would be improved by Neural Dynamics' continuing innovations. The pain of family betrayal had been transformed into purpose that extended far beyond my personal success, creating ripple effects that would touch thousands of lives in positive ways. The invisible daughter who had once sat silently in the corner while others claimed the spotlight had learned to use her voice not just for personal advancement, but for advocating on behalf of people whose dreams had been dismissed by others. Every foundation scholarship, every new job created by Neural Dynamics expansion, and every life saved by our medical AI technology represented a victory over the forces that had once tried to diminish my potential. As I reached my apartment building and looked up at the Chicago skyline glittering with possibilities, I realized that true success was not just about personal achievement, but about using your gifts and opportunities to create positive change in the world. The family gathering that had nearly destroyed us had ultimately taught us all the difference between competition and collaboration, between conditional love and unconditional support. The story that began with painful comparisons and hidden resentments had concluded with justice healing and hope for the future. Jennifer would serve her time and hopefully emerge as someone capable of making better choices, while Mom and I would continue building the honest, supportive relationship we should have had from the beginning. But most importantly, the Sullivan Foundation would ensure that other young people with dismissed dreams would have the support and encouragement they needed to achieve their potential, regardless of whether their families initially believed in their abilities. I want to ask you something that's been on my mind since sharing this story. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, like your achievements didn't matter as much as someone else's? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because I believe these experiences are more common than we often admit, and sharing our stories can help others feel less alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to let me know it made an impact. Subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and building success despite difficult circumstances. And please share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their dreams matter even when the people closest to them don't seem to understand or support their goals. Thank you for listening to my story with such patience and understanding. I hope it reminds you that setbacks and betrayals don't have to define your future, and that sometimes our greatest challenges become the foundation for our most meaningful achievements. May you find the courage to pursue your dreams, regardless of who believes in them, and may you always remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition or approval.